2026 marks the semi-quincentennial of the United States Declaration of Independence, a single yet very influential moment in time for the history of this country. The signing of the Declaration of Independence occurred during the midst of the American Revolution, a decade-long conflict that would stretch beyond the 13 now independent colonies, but into what is now Canada, the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, and the Mediterranean, while engulfing countless indigenous peoples on the North American continent. I'm Ryan Shank, and we'll be discussing the impact of the Declaration of Independence beyond the Revolution to explore how we the people built community over time and formed a shared American identity. I am joined by my co-host, Easton Phillips, who you'll recognize as the host of our last two podcast series. If you haven't listened to them, go check them out. This is Problematic, and this is Reclamation.
Yes. Welcome, everyone, to the first ever episode of Connor Prairie's newest one and only podcast, Beyond the Revolution. Come on, curatorial department. Yeah.
I don't want to pipe the mic.
No, that's fine. So, first of all, Ryan, I want to welcome you. You've been on the podcast before, but now you're, a permanent fixture.
Yeah,
how does it feel? How does it feel?
It feels great. I'm very excited about the conversations we're going to have on this series.
Me too. You look clean. You look nice.
Thank you.
Also, quick shout out also, Zoe and Hannah. We love you. We love you both. And we miss you. And what a long way we've come.
Yeah.
Finally being behind cameras.
I know. This is the first time we're trying to record. So if you're listening on wherever you get your podcast, you can also go to our YouTube channel and watch us, see what we look like, I guess. Now, I already alluded to this series, how the series will be structured, with episodes exploring themes of we the people, building community, and forming a shared American identity, all of which will be taking cues from our founding and expanding them to discuss other aspects of our 250 years as a country. Because, as this podcast name suggests, we don't just have to talk about the revolution to better understand this anniversary. But for this episode, we are going to be
However,
talking.
Can't get beyond the revolution without the revolution.
Right.
That's true.
So today we are examining the revolution and how it truly was a global conflict with a wide impact, and how this area, what is now Indiana, played a role in that.
So for this conversation, we're joined by two people who have been on Connor Prairie's podcast before. My fellow research associate homie, Dylan Rawls.
Thank you.
Welcome. And our curator of Native American history and culture, Sarah Schumacher.
glad to be here.
So, welcome back to the party. How y'all doing?
Good.
Wonderful.
Good. Y'all look great.
Thanks.
Now, I should say, here at Connor Prairie, we don't usually talk about the American Revolution. And so this will be not a little bit of out of our wheelhouse, but we're excited to sort of talk about the context here and how it impacts what we do talk about here, but also, why is this area important to the revolution? But before we get to that, I do want to ask, when you're, maybe when you were learning in school, what places, events do you think about when you hear American Revolution?
The East Coast, generally. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of the revolution, it's always where the things are happening. So on the eastern seaboard, mostly. In Philadelphia, where all the politics side is happening.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah, it seems very Philadelphia and Boston focused.
Boston gets a lot of attention,
Gets a lot of love.
because that's where it goes down.
Yeah. We briefly touched on, Georgia and the other colonies in school, but I think that was just to, check a box. Frankly.
Yeah, I found traveling on the East Coast that what is emphasized is greatly depends on what city you're in. So in Virginia, we talked a lot about George Mason, somebody that you don't hear of that much in Indiana,
Right.
and then obviously not mentioned at all in New York or Philadelphia or Boston. In Boston, you got your Sam Adams, obviously John Adams. You have in Philadelphia, Ben Franklin. Virginia, you got your George Washington, your Patrick Henry. Yeah. And so it's interesting, even on the East Coast, they like to emphasize the local history. Why is it important to understand, the history of your place you live, especially its role in some of these, larger historic events?
I mean, I think it's important because none of these things are happening in a vacuum. And so, the American Revolution especially is so large that there's a lot of moving parts there. And just because you grow up in one, just because we hear about the big figures so much, doesn't mean that other people aren't also doing things within the revolution and advancing this cause of independence from Britain for the colonist. And it's important too, just because every place is unique, and so that's your own unique history that you get to have and you get to share that others do not have. And I think that's important when we think about what is history to us.
Mm-hmm. I think also most of the time we teach or talk about history in these like shuttered context of this event, but everything that leads up to that event sets the stage, right? Dylan talked a bit about touching on the context, not in a vacuum, but also like these are the same people who went through a war not that long ago, about a decade prior, if we're talking about the white folks on the East Coast. So, that history is not forgotten for the people living through it. So understanding what their context is for the actual events makes things make more sense.
Can we detour for a second?
Yeah. Well, let me say one thing. I also think it's really interesting, especially with the conversation of forming a shared American identity, having a unified founding story that we can, have a continuous line of succession to us today is kind of, we find that very important. And so that often forces kind of education about just that single event to show that continuation, right. And not there is so much more going on and different perspectives, right? Because we are usually look at the American Revolution from the American perspective, despite,
Well, the pro-independence
America, because it's not even the majority of people in the colonies are pro-independence. The number that was thrown around when I was in grad school was 25% was pro, 25% was loyalist, and then 50% did not care. They did not want
They were too busy doing
fence sitters. We like fence sitters.
Yeah, and so it's a minority who's wanting independence. And so looking at it from all of these different perspectives, I think is interesting. But go ahead. What was your detour?
Well, I was just, a lot of us, sorry, Ryan, you weren't with us, but we went to Philadelphia a couple of years ago. And one of the things that
I went to Philadelphia 3 weeks ago.
He's been there most recently.
You've been there more recently than we have, but you didn't go with us. And so I'm sorry, but also I don't want to leave you out. But I will say, one of the coolest things that I found when we all went was, this was one of the first conflicts ever in my life that I was ever taught that added the context of Native American nations being involved, which is interesting because they were involved in a lot of conflicts, and yet they only really get brought up either when they're actively fight. Well, I mean, of course they were actively fighting, but the wars between nations, it's always that. And then, the whole Native American identity piece, for crying out loud, when they did the Boston Tea Party, they dressed up like Native Americans.
It is an important part of that story.
In the spirit of who gets left out of the story, they are often left out of the story.
I will say, speaking about the United States national history, the thing Ryan was referencing, constructing an origin story for our country, Native Americans get used when they're useful, and then they get left out when they're not. So
white people love the idea of Native Americans.
Yeah, they hate,
but then actually hate Native Americans.
Acknowledging their sovereignty. But yeah, so that's no mistake. I think that's very intentional. It's one of the first times that other sovereign nations, like Native nations, are acknowledging the United States as its own separate entity from the British. And so it makes sense that they would be included in stuff about the American Revolution. The dressing up as Native American story, the Boston Tea Party, is its own sort of microcosm of racism and also limited understandings of Native nations, especially by white people on the East Coast. But we don't have to get too deep into that because we've got more to talk about.
Thank you.
But yeah.
I appreciate that.
I do want to continue this because it is interesting, but why is it important for us to be telling a more complete, or at least more perspectives when it comes to the American Revolution?
If you don't include all the perspectives, you're not getting the whole story, right? So if you want to know about the American Revolution, you should include all of it. but that's me.
I think the American Revolution is a defining moment of the United States, right? It's its creation story. And creation stories are powerful. And they are used through the modern day. They are always used for every political persuasion you can think of.
Oh, yeah.
And, we've so often turned the founders and the revolution into a caricature of itself, which was happening, a generation after the revolution, right? Almost immediately. Think about like Boston and how that next generation of merchants and leaders, they didn't want people to remember the radicalism of the Boston, Tea Party or the
tarring and feathering,
the aftermath of the Boston Massacre, and so they sanitized it and made it less violent and less, challenging the status quo, and so people still use that today, and so. Without that fuller understanding of the American Revolution and all of the intricacies and the different shades of thought that are coming out of the Revolution, you're not equipped to talk about modern usages of the Revolution and how people are using it for their own ends. So a fuller history gives you a fuller understanding. So you can, when people talk about the founders, you can say, well, actually,
right.
Yeah.
And also, the reason why we're having this episode is adding those perspectives in also gives you a better knowledge of how different places were impacted and impacting the revolution, especially here in Indiana. You don't really think, we just mentioned, Philly, Boston, New York, all of these places as involved in the revolution, but this, what is now Indiana, was also. And you have to look at different perspectives to see how that, happened. But yeah. Before we get to Indiana, I do want to talk a little bit about the global nature of the American Revolution, because again, we think of it a bit of it's our founding story, but it impacted the rest of the world in truly profound ways. I'm not even getting to how the ideals of freedom and the things that were born out of the Declaration of Independence and eventually the Constitution impacted other countries' founding, impacted
the entire South American continent.
Right. But truly, just during the Revolution, things were happening across the globe. Since it involved these large empires like Britain, France, Spain, Netherlands, the conflict drew in and impacted many places. And just like as an example, this is not an exhaustive list because it is truly, I was looking through this and it was a lot. And I took a cue from, there was an exhibit at Valley Forge for America 250. And I wish it was a little bit more prominent. It was like on the second floor of their visitor center. There was like no one up there. And I was like, wow, this is really impactful because it just showed how global this conflict was. But like in the Caribbean, you have island countries like Dominica, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Kitts and the Nevis, where Alexander Hamilton was born. They were all captured by the French during the war. And a lot of these were originally in the, possession of the French pre 7 Years' War and ended up having to be given over to Britain at the end of that. And so France kind of was using this as an excuse to grab a lot of their former colonies. But you have like St. Lucia was captured by the British at the Battle of Cul-de-Sac. The island then served as a super important strategic naval base for the remainder of the war. Jamaica, again, a British colony. It was never officially taken over by the French, but it was blockaded. Thousands have died from starvation, disease from this French blockade that happened during this time. Cuba served as a strategic post for Spanish, launching attacks on Baton Rouge and up the Mississippi, attacking British forts. There were expeditions in Belize, Honduras, Nicaragua. And South America, you had Guyana, which was a Dutch colony at the start of the war. But in 1781, you had British privateers come up and start attack. And then the British Navy actually officially came in and took over the colony. And then a year later, the French captured it. So these, all over, there's battles. People are being wrapped up in this fight that was originally just in the 13 colonies. In Asia, you have British raiding Dutch forts in Indonesia and Sri Lanka. Fighting breaks out all over India because basically when the war broke out and France sided with the United States, all over the world, British forces were told to go attack like the nearest French forces. And so in India, you have Britain trying to basically push out the French, and then independent Kingdom of Mysore in India was like, well, we don't want the British taking everything over. So then they start fighting the British. And so it changes a dramatic amount of things all over when it comes to these colonial handlings of different areas of the world.
And I think everything you just said is all military conflicts, but think of also the economic instability. You mentioned blockades briefly, but even in places that aren't necessarily facing fighting, they're not occupied by the British or the French or anybody, they're still their trade is getting disrupted because now the high seas have turned into just a battlefield.
And
and so think of like the fur trade, coming back to where we are in Indiana, the fur trade is getting disrupted. Because it's dangerous now to go across the Atlantic. So
never know who you're gonna
bump
into.
And a lot of that pushes the fur trading companies in Canada further west as well, because they're trying to find alternate routes to trade these furs without dealing with the ships in the Atlantic.
Yeah. And like you said, even American trade ships, they're getting attacked all over. One of the first times, after the French and after the Lenape, to recognize the United States as sovereign is the Sultan of Morocco. He claims American ships going through Mediterranean under his protection. And so, in Africa. And then also you have troops mustering from places and coming to the United States, Irish, Hessian. But also there's, a militia of 500 men of color in Haiti come up to fight in Savannah, Georgia. So truly people are coming all over for this battle. And then obviously the impacts and influences, if we want to talk about the Haitian Revolution. You mentioned basically all of the revolutions that then happened in South Africa.
What are the dates? By like 1820, most of South America is now independent of Spanish control.
Boulevard.
It's crazy how fast it moves.
Yeah.
But this part of the continent, the Great Lakes region, particularly who controlled it, played a major role in European conflicts with native people and each other for a long time.
Yep.
What made this area so unique that people wanted it?
Well, so the area that becomes Indiana has always been a borderlands, right? Like, it is claimed by many different nations, but the Miami specifically, this is their homelands, and this is an area where there's a lot of rivers and a lot of alluvial channels that allow for trade, because those are your highways if you don't want to walk directly over land because there's no roads. There's also, like, we mentioned the fur trade. There's a heavy influence from that once the Europeans start appearing in the 1640s with the French. This land is very fertile. It's easy to cultivate. Well, easy-ish to cultivate.
And it's flat, right? Is that helpful?
The top 2/3 are, yeah. Actually, you see most settlement happening in the bottom third by a lot of these colonizing groups, because it's not just European nations, it's the Americans and folks from Kentucky, all moving into the southern third a lot faster than you see from the top two, which doesn't really work with the whole flat to farm thing. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening here prior to the revolution, during the revolution, and afterwards that are directly affected by the economic and like physical changes from the revolution.
Yeah. And this was important during, pre-revolution, like for colonial powers.
I mean, we've mentioned the 7 years war. This is part of the area they're fighting over. The forts in this area, we are a part of Quebec at that point. The French are fighting to maintain this area, the Pays de Haut, and excuse my French pronunciation because it's bad. But this is part of the area they're fighting over to control because of the natural resources present here. And because the Native nations did such a great job stewarding it and maintaining it, that it was valuable and full of all of this wealth, that all the Europeans wanted it. So.
And I do want to touch on, because we keep saying control this area.
Yeah.
That looks very different between on paper and on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
Can you kind of explain what that difference is?
So a lot of the European nations are claiming control over this area by establishing forts in key trading areas, like confluences of rivers or specific waterways or boundaries between native nations. but they don't necessarily actually control this area. They're just operating out of these forts and then claiming a certain land around the vicinity of those forts. Most of it is military occupation, but they don't actually control much of what's happening on the ground. They have no control over these sovereign nations. They have no control over what they're doing. The Europeans love to claim it, but it's not actual control.
Right. We see it flip back and forth, but materially, it's just which European power gets to trade.
Yeah.
But even then,
They're still doing backdoor deals or prior alliances. The thing about a lot of the native nations in this area is that they will have a sort of contractual agreement, as we would use today, and stick to that. So even if the French get booted out because of the end of the 7 Years' War and those treaties, and the British move in, the agreement was with the French. So now the British have to come up with their own agreement. But the British are operating under the European assumption that those agreements that the French had that were favorable for the French are the ones they're going to get. But they don't have any prior connection to these communities. They don't have any good feelings or good dealings. So why would they have the same agreement? They're an entirely different trading party.
right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a really interesting point, right? So why aren't we seeing a lot of like large scale settlement in this area? Like, why is it just dotted forts and not much else?
Yeah, especially before the American Revolution.
Yeah, it's dangerous.
Yep.
Same thing with the Atlantic Ocean. Can't go
Yeah.
there.
So, I mean, this area is the Midwest, and I think in most European minds is kind of this gem, right? It's a large area. It's, like Sarah said, has a lot of natural resources that Europe doesn't have, and that by the 1760s, the East Coast is struggling, right? And you have a large population. But with all the native nations that are out here, and Andrew Caton has a wonderful kind of idea that, this area has undergone so many transitions and ownerships, quote unquote, controlling interest or whatever, right? You have the French who say they control it, but they're not really interested in establishing dominance, right? Like Sarah said, they're worried about forts and trade. Then you get the British after the 7 Years' War. They're more interested in establishing direct control over the area, but they don't have the power, right? And then we get the American Revolution. But once the British get control of this area, Europe is, to Europeans, borders are very important. And those mean something. And native nations' understandings of borders are different than the European understanding. And wherever we see borders not clearly distinguished, you get a lot of violence. You have white people attacking native villages. You have native villages retaliating or attacking squatters. There's a lot of violence both ways. And so the King George III, decided that the Appalachian Mountains are going to be the dividing line. So the Proclamation Line of 1763 says you cannot go west of these mountains. You have to stay east of them. And that builds up a lot of resentment because we just had the 7 Years' War where these colonists and these British subjects are fighting, theoretically, for this land.
The colonists send militias.
Right. And now you're saying, I can't go there, right? So I think an important thing to understand also is that legally, firstborns always get the farm, right? Firstborns have an important role or important station in inheritances. People are having more than one kid, though, at this time.
They have to, yeah.
And so with this population growing and all the younger kids not getting anything from their parents in terms of land, they really want to go west of the Appalachian Mountains. And the king is telling them no. The parliament is telling them no. So it's really builds a lot of resentment that is going to build and lead to what we see in the 1770s.
West and more west still.
And also, the king is like, not only do you not get to go west, you also have to pay for this war.
You can't get any of this land, but also now you have to pay us for defending that land you now have no right to.
I will also say beyond the proclamation line, there are British forts that are being occupied. So like those forts, like the ones we have in Indiana, are like Fort Wayne, Lafayette, like those areas. They're being occupied by the British, but not by your average colonist who can actually profit off
Yeah,
of moving.
they're not
there.
coming in
Yeah.
and farming or
And there are
Well, we see
still
a
French
little
citizens
bit.
in those areas too.
I think it's important to note that there are not any settlers.
No,
right?
yeah.
You do get settlers, but they are always around the forts because the forts can provide protection. And when stuff goes down, you can go into the fort.
And they've got a big wall you can hide behind. It's great.
Just cut and run.
So there are those that are ignoring the proclamation line
Oh yeah.
and are going anyway. And also there are people who are already out here, right? The French in Vincennes, they've been there since the 1600s.
And they've been farming.
And they're going to
Yeah.
stay there.
And they're not moving.
So.
Yep. I will also say a lot of people who are moving out here, particularly for the fur trade, are also married into these native nations. So some of them have a legal, in the European terms, like understanding of a right to stay because they're married into these communities. Otherwise, there are also squatters and stuff. So like there is a distinction there in native communities of like, well, if you're married into us, we'll keep you. But if you've made no attempt to add to our community or be a part of our community, why would we let you stay here? You're just taking our stuff. And then you're also like being very violent when we're nearby for no reason. Or sometimes for a reason. I will give them some benefit of the doubt. But like generally that is the case.
People are people.
Yeah, people
you
are
know.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to discuss a like specific example of, encroachment and conflict, there's Pontiac's Rebellion, right? Mm-hmm. That happens before the American Revolution.
Yes. It is also happening a little bit. There's a lot of stuff happening in this area. There's Pontiac's Rebellion. There's Lord Dunmore's War. There's a lot of conflict happening that affect the tribes in this area. Pontiac's Rebellion or revolt, there's different terms for the same conflict, is a confederation of native nations who come together to try to push back against the British. It is highly contentious for certain groups and their understandings of like being part of America. But by the time of the American Revolution, a lot of the people who have fought or started learning how to fight during the rebellion are a part of the groups that then fight in the revolution. So it's important in that way.
It's also important as sort of an example of native groups starting to confederate together.
This would not be the first example of that, but yeah, it's one of the first ones that white people write about. It's just not the first one that's happening. I mean, very early on, you have the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which influences their tenets of agreement between their communities, influences the Constitution. So there's a lot of political things happening that affect the Americans early on.
But would you say that all this encroachment is speeding up the amount of confederacies being formed?
Yeah. I mean, anytime you have people taking up your space, your resources, your food, is a problem. And, a lot of native nations have this cultural understanding of sharing, that they're very willing and very open to letting people be and join their community. But you have to contribute and then you have to give and be given, right? It's a two-way street.
What a
But
beautiful
a lot
concept.
a lot of the squatters are not willing to do that. They want separate. And that's not
that's
how
their
they
culture.
do things. Yeah.
So
but that's not how the native nations do things. So it's causing a lot of strife.
Clash of cultures.
Yeah.
And so building this tension, this sort of conflict and tension to move west and, the retaliation against moving west settlement is called out specifically in the Declaration of Independence as one of the colonists' grievances against the crown, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think that it's a mistake that is a politicized talking point at the time. You see this come up often, especially as the United States continues to reinforce manifest destiny and all these ideas, right, is that they have to move west, and that's inevitable. And the conflict is a problem of the native nations and not the colonization, when in actuality that's not the case. It's a spin being put on that conflict. It's not really like... Conflict is not a inherent aspect of these native nations. They're very diplomatic. We have a lot of evidence of different agreements between these native nations and colonists of varying origins, right? With the British, the French, the Dutch, the Swedes. all these different groups that come in, and they're very willing to work with these communities, but the way that it is spun in the Declaration sets them up as a villain, right? And as a direct opponent to the colonists' pursuit of happiness, in that sense, pursuit of life, liberty, all the things. And that is a politicized talking point. Often it's us versus them. Well, now we have a them for us both to fight, us and the British, right? So,
I mean, I think it's also just another instance of a misunderstanding between two cultures.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of the early Americans, most of the colonists, or now Americans, right, as we go through the Revolution, they see this resource that is the West, and they see how Native Americans use it, and they believe they're using it wrong, right? Because Native Americans are not farming or using agriculture the way colonists understand farming to be, and so in their mind, if you're not going to use it, then give it here,
Right.
And we just waged a war. It's ours. They have this. They think it's an entitlement to that land, and they are not willing to. They see Native Americans as oftentimes lesser than them. You have some notable exemptions, right? Usually men, leaders of Native nations, usually are seen more favorably than everyone else. But they can use it better. And so it's going to be ours, is how they're viewing it.
And it's an interesting contradiction, because once fighting breaks out and then the Declaration is, written and adopted, Native nations are very important to the beginning of the beginning of the United States. I'll let Sarah talk about, recognizing the United States. And so there's that recognition of sovereignty both ways, but also both the British and American are immediately trying to find allies in this fight.
I will also say, because of all of the conflict that has happened generation after generation in this area and between the Mississippi and the Atlantic coast generally, those Native nations have a lot of people who know how to fight. And they know how to fight in a way that the British don't. So they are very useful as allies.
And they know the land better than anyone.
They do. They know the land.
Fighting in this area.
Yeah. So they are very helpful allies to have. They're very desirable, which means that while the early United States, the colonists and Americans, however we're referring to them at this point, they are both seeing them as a direct threat to their continued thriving, and also the best tool in their toolkit to beat the British, especially before you really get all the stuff at Valley Forge and all the training and things. They are very helpful early on in keeping the Americans alive in the fight, and so their contributions should not be understated.
Well, and I want to get it from the Native perspective too. Why would you choose, America versus Britain? What kind of agency do they have in these decisions?
It depends on the Native nation, right? So a lot of these groups have standing alliances with the British. They're not going to break that contract if they can avoid it. Doesn't mean they're not also trading with both sides, because they have an agreement not to fight you, not to not trade with your enemies. There's also differences within a nation. So the Potawatomi, for example, the Western groups are cool with the British. They've got this alliance. They want to hold on to those trade routes. They want to continue making things happen the way they were happening. But the Eastern ones are more directly impacted by the conflicts happening. They're getting attacked by white militias, both from the British and the Americans, and they're really upset about it. And so they are neutral at first as a nation, but then they're kind of sympathetic to the Americans. And then they full out ally at Fort Recovery, Battle Blue Licks. They're doing what they can to fight, but not necessarily being the frontline soldiers, if that makes sense. They're more involved in Ohio, what becomes Ohio. There's also the Miami. They're they're technically pro-Brit, but they're more neutral than anything. And when they join the fighting, they only fight when it's appropriate for their nation. So a lot of leaders are trying to make this like not easy decision of weighing, one, what their prior agreements are, two, how helpful will it be for their nation to ally with this unknown power that's just cropping up that has very little oomph behind it. They're untested as an ally. They're also trying to make the best decision for their communities. So if they're experiencing a lot of white encroachment, they may not be very sympathetic to the Americans because a lot of them are the ones doing the encroachment. The British officials, like representing the British side, are playing up that as a divisive measure to try to prevent Native nations from allying with the Americans. There's also troops from both sides just attacking any Native communities they find. Right. They are not distinguishing between allies and non-allies. Some of them don't bother to tell Native nations apart, and then others don't care, and then others are probably mistaken or ignorant. Right. So there's a lot of nuance there that's not easy to nail down. Right. But there are 80 tribes between the Mississippi and the Atlantic coast directly impacted by conflict in the revolution. So like there's a lot going on.
And there's a lot of promises being made, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I do want to talk about one specific example with Lenape, because there's examples of treaties happening, promises being made, but also, like you were just talking about, indiscriminate attacks, all within the same tribe. So can you talk about that first treaty with Lenape and what was promised to them?
Oh, yeah. So the 1778 treaty at Fort Pitt was with the Lenape. They had already been removed from their homelands, so they're further west than they originally were. They have an agreement with the burgeoning United States government that says, we will let you pass through our lands peacefully. We won't directly attack you. We may even further ally with you in the future. In exchange, we expect an independent state just for the Lenape that's supposed to be just theirs, where they can live and not be encroached upon, as if like another colony. This does not come to fruition. They're also promised like different annuities and different resources. Those also don't fully get paid out because the United States is broke. And we also know later on the Lenape experienced direct attacks by the Pennsylvania militia in Nadhoughton. That massacre kills, I believe, 97 or so people, men, women, and children, who are fully pacifists and in a Moravian community, all of which are the Delaware. They did not kill the white people. They killed the Native Americans in that community, who had already tried to assimilate in a way that would allow them to continue to exist in their space without getting removed again, unsuccessfully. So.
Yeah, and I do just want to highlight, we mentioned it before, but this is the treaty that is the second example of the United States being a sovereign nation. It's
they recognize the United States as a sovereign power, and the United States recognizes the Lenape as a sovereign power as well. So it's an equal exchange in that sense.
Thank you, Sarah. When you're in fourth grade here in Indiana, you learn about the history of Indiana, and you start with Native nations, but very quickly get into American Revolution. And here we have a bit of a mythic hero, I would say, in George Rogers Clark. So I did want to ask you sort of who he was and what was his role in the American Revolution.
Yeah, George Rogers Clark is the son of a enslaver out in Virginia, older brother of William Clark, who will go on to help lead the Lewis and Clark expedition. He joins the army, and he works his way up, and he ends up coming west during the Revolution. And his claim to fame is the taking of Vincennes, or Fort Sackville. So he raises some troops, and they go through the Illinois country, and they take Kaskaskia, Cahokia, and then they take Vincennes. Well, they then leave, but then the British come back down the Wabash. I think something like 5,000 troops get sent down the Wabash.
Oh, dang.
Because Vincennes is an important trading point, right?
Oh, yeah.
You're on the Wabash, right by the, very close to the Ohio River, so that's a very important spot. But they send some troops down from Fort Detroit to come down, and Rogers Clark is planning on trying to take Fort Detroit. But then he hears that Sackville has been retaken, and so they end up attacking in the winter, which is very uncommon. And they take Sackville back, and that is kind of the claim to fame. Early historians, and at the time, I suppose, George Rogers Clark won the West for, the colonies. And I think more recently we've kind of re-examined Clark's role and maybe taken some of that credit away, in that it was just a temporary victory and not much was accomplished, so to speak. But yeah, that's Clark's claim to fame, and I think it makes sense that Indiana has put him on such a pedestal, because that is kind of our one military engagement that's happening during the Revolution, and everyone wants to be involved in the Revolution, right? Everyone wants a role in your founding, and so there he is. Now he has statues throughout the state.
Yeah.
I will also say, in terms of the white settlement of Indiana, like Clark's Grant is one of the earliest areas of what becomes Indiana that gets ceded from Native nations to white settlement.
Yeah.
He also owned slaves there and ran a mill, or made them run the mill, I guess I should say.
Yeah, I've just always been fascinated with George Rogers Clark. When I was in 4th grade, they made me memorize a rap about him. And it's
Oh my gosh, please.
It literally starts with George Rogers Clark is our hero's name. And the second line is he won the Midwest and gained the fame.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it from very early on, it was like he is this Hoosier hero.
He's this upstart taking on the fearsome British army.
Well, and the way he takes Sackville is an interesting story to tell younger people, because it's largely done without actual fighting. He boosters his numbers by having more flags and more fires, and so the British see all of these flags and fires and think that he has a much larger force than he does, and so he takes the fort, and when they march the troops in, the British are just like, where is everybody? It's it. But yeah, it is interesting, because Treaty of Paris, the end of the American Revolution, this area is then handed over to
the Americans.
Without consultation of the Native nations on either side, I should
Right.
say.
There's no representation of Native nations at the Treaty of Paris. I should also say all that list of the global conflicts that were going on also were happening. So by the time Treaty of Paris, they could decide actually who these territories went by how much territory you took. And so that's for a long why we thought Sackville was so important, because that's the one thing that we can point to be like, oh, actually, it's because we already had, Fort Sackville that the Midwest goes to the Americans. But I don't know. Should I ask you why did it really go?
I mean, I don't know the specifics. I just always assumed that it's the Mississippi is they use it as a dividing point. I don't know why they chose the Mississippi, whether they thought that was half or whether they thought that was just a good geographic boundary to, because they love geography.
Well, I mean, the other side of the Mississippi is Spain. So that's part of it, is another European nation has laid claim over those areas. Now, are they actually all the way out there? They're along the rivers and bodyways, but they're not fully controlling that area. I will also say that part of the dividing lines for what becomes the Northwest Territory are a product of the prior claims made by the governor of Virginia during Lord Dunmore's War, which is prior to the American Revolution. I believe it's 1774. You might fact check me on that. But he claims everything from the Ohio River to the Great Lakes on this side of the Mississippi, right? And so, that is... that geographical area has been desired by American powers or colonial powers for a while, especially the ones centered on the East Coast.
Yeah. So, Britain gets to keep Canada.
Yeah.
Go back to Canada. America gets the rest.
I
Well,
think the St. Lawrence River
Spain gets the-
is very important for that too. So they fight for keeping that as part of the fur trade.
Yeah, after the revolution is one of the largest, refugee crises that we've seen up until then, with all of these loyalists fleeing the American colonies into Canada. You have them, going down to New Orleans.
And they didn't have to leave, but,
I mean, once you make a public
'cause, I mean,
declaration
part of
to
the-
the king.
I mean, part of the Treaty of Paris says that they have to be treated, they can't be slaughtered or anything.
Yeah.
But if you prefer the king over this newfound democracy, which people had a lot of opinions on, democracy, you would leave. So, yeah.
Well, and we keep mentioning Lord Dunmore, but Dunmore made a proclamation that if you're an enslaved person and you helped the British, you got your freedom. And obviously that couldn't happen in the colonies. And so,
Well, and if I'm not mistaken, I don't think many of them
Actually got it.
actually got it.
Well-
Yeah, I'm not sure if that promise
or they
was
got
fully
shipped
followed
off
through
to
on.
other.
originally to Arcadia and then Sierra Leone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go back to Africa.
And
Jesus.
The original Go Back movement.
well, it is a really interesting story. I highly suggest Maya Jasanoff's Liberty's Exiles. It tells the story of
Why it's
the
there.
recolonization of Sierra Leone and the difficulties when you have a population before, the United States tried doing it with Liberia of recolonizing an area in Africa for
Sounds good on paper.
Does
right.
it?
Horrible in
The
execution.
natural curiosity of youth.
Well said, everyone. So we're going to take a quick break from this stuff to talk about each other. And we're going to talk about it in a way that we have done. For those who have seen This is Reclamation, we have something called the Joy Corner, where we bring our folks in and kind of talk about some fun. It's like one serious question and one not so serious question. Dylan, did you happen to listen to any of This is Reclamation?
I did.
What was your favorite episode?
I really enjoyed Alex Richards and the discussion of outdoor spaces and African Americans. It's not something we typically think of. So it was enlightening.
That's my favorite too, I will say. Ryan, did you enjoy a specific This is Reclamation episode? You were out there.
I did. That was the first time I was on mic. So I really enjoyed talking with Israel Solomon and admittedly learned a lot because I'm not too much of an artist myself. And his sort of expansive view on what art is and how it is not just, the traditional forms that we think. I would suggest go checking that out. We talk a lot about video games.
Video
in that
games
episode.
is art.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I think my favorite is the episode you guys recorded outside at Juneteenth.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
With This is Reclamation, we had a lot of heavy subjects, and so we wanted a moment of levity, a moment for us to get to know our guests, and so we're, borrowing that from This is Reclamation, and so let's go over to the Joy Corner,
Here
Easton.
we go, Joy Corner. So I am going to ask y'all a question, 2 questions, but the first one is going to be a little bit more, I guess, serious, I guess you can say, even though they're all supposed to be fun. But this first one, so do you guys have like a big idea in your mind that you think would work super well if only you just had unlimited money?
Unlimited money.
If money were no object. That's a common theme between both questions, but this one is just like, what's an idea? And since I've cheated, I'll go first if you guys want more thinking time.
Okay.
I think what we should do, in the spirit of America 250, we need to have a version of the Olympics around America that you can host like state to state. However, it's all like backyard games. So instead of like,
So cornhole. and
yeah,
lawn
I need
darts.
some cornhole, some lawn darts, some tetherball, kickball, obviously. But like, I think that would just be really cool if you could like kind of, because they're having this whole discussion about like, okay, America's supposed to host the World Cup, but like the group stages are going to be in like Columbus and stuff, despite the fact that it's Also, the Olympics are also going to be in America. So this whole thing of like, it's so hard to have it all condensed into one city, especially even a city that's as massive as Los Angeles. You still got to have some soccer going down in other places. So wouldn't it be so cool if could you imagine all the state flags just marching down, I don't know, Main Street? Does Indianapolis have a Main Street?
We have Meridian.
There you
Yeah,
go.
that's our
Could
Main
you imagine just all those state flags walking down Meridian like the Parade of Nations, but instead of the,
Falling into potholes. Be a great time.
Yeah, I mean, get in
But
touch
you have
with the
unlimited
culture.
money, so I would suggest repaving the roads first.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. All right, so local American Olympics backyard games, you just want the roads repaved. Is that your final answer?
I mean,
For your big idea, that's just my suggestion for your big idea.
do you
bring it
need
home.
unlimited money to do something at Conner Prairie, or do you mean just generally?
Oh no, this has nothing to do with Conner Prairie. I mean
Great.
anything.
Okay, because I had a Conner Prairie answer, but now I have to come up with something else. So Dylan, do you want to go?
I would fund the building of more all-you-can-eat buffets.
Those have taken a huge hit since COVID.
I know, and it's really sad. I think they should be more accessible because they're great.
Economical.
Land back.
Dang, Sarah.
I mean, money.
yeah.
You can afford to do that. You
them
can
their
you
land
can
back.
pay for everybody to leave and just give it back to the Native Americans.
Although I have a question.
Oh God.
No, I'm not going to.
Well, mine sounds bad after that.
I led in with all-you-can-eat buffets.
I was gonna say I was very surprised, Easton, that you didn't say dirigibles.
Oh,
I do want to bring back
An Olympic
dirigibles.
of dirigibles.
Well,
And
because
the Parade of Nature. I mean, France just did the parade down the river.
and the reason why I bring that up is because I was thinking public transit, primarily trains, like bring back interurbans. Shout out Indiana Historical Society, who hopefully we'll have on the podcast for this season. They have a great exhibit on interurbans in Indiana, and it's crazy because I've been traveling to a ton of small cities in Indiana. It would have been so much better if I could take it by train.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And we had the infrastructure set up and just ripped it all out. So
Yep.
Well, we
Noblesville
needed-
just ripped theirs out a couple years ago.
yeah.
We needed the metal for the metal drives during the World Wars. So
Well, Noblesville just did. I mean, just recently in Hamilton County, right? You've had the railroads getting ripped up and replaced with the Nickel Plate Trail and the Monon expansions and things.
Well, and I grew up in northern Indiana, which has the last one, the South Shore, which was so great. As a high schooler, I could just take a train to Chicago for the day.
I know. I hear about all these places in Europe. It's like, oh, you can just take the train. It's like, oh, that sounds lovely. Instead, I have to drive a car and go
Right.
find a parking spot.
Oh, gosh.
Horrible.
Dylan and
how much
parking.
more reading I could get
That's
done
my
if I
big
had
idea.
a train to take.
And speaking of, travel, what's the next question?
So our next question is there anywhere outside of the United States you would want to travel if money was no object?
I would say Central Europe, Germany, Austria, Switzerland. My family has Mennonite roots, and so going back through and seeing some of the historical sites. of
Would
that
you wear
culture.
Lederhoses and walk around the
Lederhosen?
mountains? What do you
Oh,
call
yeah,
them?
a black
Lederhoses?
horse.
What do you call them? Those little shorty shorts?
Lederhosen?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You would?
Lederhoses.
Whatever the
That'd be fun.
leather shorts are.
You yodel in the Alps. That's what they do out there, right?
Cool.
I can visualize you yodeling in the Alps, to be fair.
Like the Ricola commercial.
And I took German, so it'd be a little more comfortable.
Yeah.
I guess I'll go next. I'm torn. No pun intended. Because I too am America. But no, seriously, I'm stuck because growing up, I took Spanish. I'm not fluent. Por supuesto. But I will say there is, I always found Dia de los Muertos to be very, very cool. So the Day of the Dead celebration for those who are not fluent in Espanol. Because it's this really cool cultural thing where like, this is pretty heavy, but I'm going to go anyway for a fun question. But like their whole like the way they kind of celebrate a person's life and kind of incorporate death as a part of their life. Like we don't really think of like chilling in a cemetery, but for one time a year, actually, I think it's like a week. Like for 1 week a year in Mexico, like you go and you build an altar and you kind of just sit and almost and you kind of sit and you just reminisce about the people who've left us, and it's very. I've always felt like that was very cool, but there are parts of Mexico that, of course, are unsafe, and so I don't know exactly where in Mexico I would go. I've been to like very touristy parts of Mexico on a cruise, but I feel like that's not really authentic. But also, that's kind of tugging on my other urge to see a real castle in real life. So
How do you
anywhere
define a real castle? Because there's castles in Florida.
I don't want to see a Florida castle.
That's fair.
I want to see where Knights was at.
Are you talking like Disney, or are you talking like St. Augustine?
The world's
I was
down
talking
there.
about the Coral Castle.
Okay.
The one guy built.
The
Sarah's
St.
like, I
Augustine's
a
got all
place
those
for- I got a place
1500s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
47.
1300s. Yeah.
1300s.
Yeah, I don't want to go to see a Florida castle. No offense to the castles in Florida. I'm sure they're beautiful, but I want to go to like England, Scotland. Like I want to see where like some siege engines were used. I want to see where
Where a
trebuchet.
trebuchet.
I want to see trebuchets. Woo! That's what I want.
Sick.
So, okay. That's all for Easton.
All right. I think I would either go. I also have familial roots in Germany. I think I might visit family there, or I don't know. I've never been to any other continent besides the United States and Europe. Like I've not been to Canada. I've not been to Mexico. I've not been to anywhere else in North America but the United States. And I've only been to like England and France. So I think I would probably go. I'd probably try to hit all 7 if I
Ooh.
can. Maybe not Antarctica because that seems like a lot to go stand in the
No,
snow.
don't walk it back now.
You got
6
it.
out of the 7 is fine.
You heard it here, folks. Sarah's going to Antarctica.
You have to get
I
us
mean-
a selfie with a penguin. As
Don't you
proof.
got to go through like the Cape of the Drake Passage or something?
Yeah, which is why I'm like, maybe not. But
kinda rocky.
if money is no object, then I can pay to not have medical complications while trying to travel.
Yeah, we
So-
don't. We really don't want that.
Yeah.
We don't want that for you. Exhibit coming
There's
down over
fish that live in Antarctica, like under the ice, that their blood is more ice than blood.
Ew.
It's so cool.
That's pretty cool.
Where would I go? I don't know. I don't know where my family's from. So I don't have any familial yearnings to go. Probably Britain. We're pretty white.
You've got an ancestor in the Mayflower.
That's true, I guess. So I guess I do know. I lied. Cut that part. Well, when I'm not, I mean, my foremost passion is antebellum American history, but I also do like medieval history. So I would probably go to, I would say Italy would be fun. I did have a slight obsession in undergrad for the Medici. So it was fun learning about that. But I like those 1400s. So I think Italy would be a good place to start. And they got pasta. So
Oh yeah, they got good stuff over there.
Awesome.
All right, we'll call that Joy Corner done.
Thank you both.
There was a lot of joy. There was a lot of joy in there. Love that.
Abnormal behavior. It's smart. It's thrilling. It provides kick.
In 2026, we are opening our new Museum Experience Center, and one of the opening exhibits in this new building is Torn a Family Portrait. And one of the first lines you see in this exhibit is talking about how this is a story that happened here, and this is also a story of America. So how is the story of William Connor, Macungus, the Lenape, and what would become Connor Prairie relevant to America, the American Revolution and beyond?
Well, so the Lenape, by the time they get to what becomes Indiana, they have been removed several times already by the British colonists, America. Particularly the Treaty of Greenville in 1795 is what brings them to the White River in Indiana, and they survive multiple subsequent removals further west. They eventually end up in Oklahoma in the 1860s, late 1860s, early 1870s, and they continue to fight for their sovereignty and preserving their culture and their language and their ways of living throughout the entire time that they're interacting with colonizing powers, including the United States.
And this isn't
yeah.
something necessarily unique, but the Lenape
No.
do have
Yeah.
some of the one of the most times, but the Lenape are removed one of the largest amount of times, right?
Yes, they're removed many times. Depending on which group you are following, it's about 12 on average, which is a lot. And they get removed from the Atlantic coast all the way, like they're from around New Jersey. And
Wow.
they get removed from there all the way to Oklahoma, which I don't want to say is the largest amount because I don't know that for sure, but it's a very significant distance over many different environments, many different changes in food, weather, seasonal patterns, that kind of thing. And why we specifically focus on the Lenape and their members with relationships in this area is because of the marriage between William and Macungus. The land that we are on was granted to William, his wife, and their children, but that message did not arrive until after their removal. And William stayed here, and he continued to occupy the land. There's quit claims and things, but that land has stayed in possession since it was granted, in possession of white people since it was granted to William and his family. And so the story of this land is directly tied to that understanding and that process of what happens to that community all the way up to today.
I think it's a microcosm of early America, especially this side of the Appalachian Mountains, because you have white settlers, you have Native nations, figuring out how to interact with these groups and being under the pressure of removal. Right, once the Americans win, they pretty immediately start trying to exert dominance over this area. And they are also looking to get land for settlers and expansion because, the population is booming in the east and you need a place for people to go. And so they look west and they don't think about living together. They think of, kicking Native nations out. And so, the Lenape and the Connors play an integral role in this area in the process of removal and colonization and settlers and things like that.
Yeah. And William himself is, born in the midst of the Revolution. He's born in December of 1777.
I mean, his family is being forced to move from, central Ohio all the way to Detroit. So the British can keep an eye on the Moravians and things like that. So, they cut that part out. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh.
I trailed off at the end. I was agreeing with you.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying it's an interesting time because it is that point of the Revolution. George Washington is getting to Valley Forge, which is on traditional Lenape homelands. Just everything kind of comes full circle. But it's William Connors and also an interesting study on this myth of like rugged individualism. So when he comes here, it's not him by himself. He pretty much immediately finds a community to live amongst.
Yeah, and he comes with his brother, and we know his brother comes first, and we know that there are already traders living on the White River. So they're not the first here. Those relationships have already been started, and we know that John and William marry in pretty immediately so they can get those connections and they can start building a trade network for themselves to work as fur traders. And that works. They keep that up for 20-odd years, and then removal, comes through.
Yeah. I don't really have much to add to that.
And I think also, not only a microcosm of like settlers and removal, but also the ways that they are interacting with Native nations, I think is interesting and a kind of a microcosm to study how those early interactions look. From all we can see, the Connor story seems to be pretty reciprocal with the Lenape. Obviously more weighted against the Lenape, right? Because we know the Connors are working as interpreters and traders and working for the government, working for the military. And ultimately are working towards the removal of the Lenape peoples. But we also have instances where they seem to be pretty integrated into the community and have good relations with them. The Delaware are hiring, John to go with them places and to work as an interpreter. So there's obviously some trust going both ways. So it's an interesting, complicated, nuanced story.
And that's what strikes me in looking at this specific example. Like, saying America's story is complicated, like, yeah, obviously, but it's so hard to like capture that nuance in a single story. But with this, there are so many contradictions, and because it's on that individual level, you can see decisions that had to be made, and whether we, know exactly all of the thought process that were going into those decisions, we can see how these large forces are impacting a single family.
And I think the exhibit's also important just because it talks about the role of women. Right? The Lenape are very matrilineal, and it explores and shows how those women are often forgotten and erased, especially in Native nations. And so I think that's also an important part of the story.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when we have told the story of removal here, we've focused on William's role in it. And we do a little bit in Torn. We focus on how many of the Connors, William and his siblings, were involved in removal. But we don't talk as much about how the Native nations their leaders are fighting to try to preserve their communities, try to provide stability in very unstable times. I mean, we've talked about, 5-6 different wars here.
Right.
In 50 years. And so it's a lot of stuff happening all at once, trying to lead a community and protect your people in a place where there are no great choices. So, yeah.
A place where there's no great choices.
I mean,
I like that.
Indiana's pretty rough.
Do we want to get into why Indiana's rough?
Why is Indiana rough, Sarah?
There's
And
a
Dylan?
lot of disease. There's famine. There's a year without a summer. 1816, year without a summer. Like, it literally snows and frosts over on the 4th of July, which is insane.
Was that because of like a volcanic eruption? Somewhere?
Yes,
Okay.
out in the Pacific.
And I think that can just be, that can be zoomed out to just a lot of the West, where you haven't had exposure to the diseases that are out there, and it's a hard life in the West, because I mean, you have to make a home, you have to get farmland in, you got trees to cut down. So
Logs are heavy.
Hard work.
Logs are heavy.
And the indigenous folks learned to work around all these things.
Yeah.
But white people did not. We were just cut it down.
Yeah.
And now here we are.
So
Farmlands for days.
So unfortunate, too. Maybe if they had asked some of those indigenous folks for help instead of kicking them out, they'd probably get along a lot better.
I mean, yeah, but that would require acknowledging that they also had equal value and knowledge and
rights to the land.
Yeah, and rights to the land, and makes it a lot hard to justify kicking them out. It also makes it harder to justify treating them differently. When you dehumanize people, it allows you to treat them with a certain level of lack of care, consideration, and that is oftentimes what we see that pattern building when white communities come in contact with Native nations. Initially, they're marrying in, they're building these relationships, and then over time, things start to shift and that power balance changes, and that dehumanization tends to peak, and it then allows for the justification of removal and manifest destiny and all these different aspects of why the United States colonized so far west.
And the story that we tell in Torn goes well beyond, like this podcast, beyond the revolution, beyond the story of just Macungus and William Connor, but takes that onto today, because that's why this matters. This is why we tell these stories, is how it's impacting us today. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the Lenape are still here. Just straight up. So are all the other Native nations we mentioned in this podcast. All of these communities are still present. They're still sovereign nations. And although they exist within the United States, and some of them outside of the United States partially, these sovereign nations are still present. They're still fighting for their rights. They're still a part of this country and part of what exists within the United States. They are Americans just like us. that was not always the case. About 100 years ago, they were granted citizenship. And I put quotes around that because putting it in law doesn't always mean that it gets enforced on the ground. As we've talked about with the British promising African Americans freedom if they fought for the British. So like things like that where promises are made, those ramifications are still in effect today in all of these places.
Yeah, even though 250 years ago we were founded as a country, and that impacts the United States in obvious ways, it also is impacting all of these other sovereign nations very clearly today. Thank you. Thank you both. I think today we realized Prairie can represent a microcosm of the United States. Like our country's founding, the stories of people here are birthed through mixing of cultures, the movement of people, and changing community.
Well said. The real great American melting pot. Not necessarily Prairie, but, it's out there. And although we're very far from the center of the revolution, and the stories of indigenous folks, fur traders, and their families like William Connor, they tie directly into our country's origin, and they give us a unique way to interpret the 250th anniversary of our country. Instead of focusing on the founders and the framers, we can explore the impact, agency, and influence of the people on the fringes of the revolution.
Yeah, and we're uniquely positioned to talk about the ideals of the revolution and how people interpreted and challenge them. These ideas are ever present, and our Promised Land is Proven Ground exhibit. Check out This is Reclamation, another plug for that, and are evident in the further removal of Miami, Lenape, Shawnee, Potawatomi, and other indigenous nations from the state.
Yeah, we don't talk about the Miami enough, I feel. It's their land,
Yeah.
Straight up.
Something we're working on.
But anyway, by the 1830s, Americans are grappling with how issues like labor and suffrage and education and the role of government and the role of women in society fit into their evolving understanding of the founding documents. And through Prairie Town, which is our huge, big thing, we can explore how people in the past addressed these issues and then use that knowledge to better inform our present.
Be sure to follow us on this journey as we explore America's 250th anniversary beyond the revolution. Next episode, we will take a behind-the-scenes look at how public history has approached the commemoration and how it compares to past anniversaries.
Yes, please do follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. Shout out of the day. I have 2 shout outs. We're going to do a shout out every single episode. 2. Also, Shannon. Shout out Shannon. She's the only member of the curatorial department that's not here. And so I want to give her a presence. And also, I want to say shout out to our homies down at Prophetstown. They're great, and they're huge fans of the podcast. So thank y'all so much. And until next time. Don't wave goodbye. Bye.